This is a hipster photo.
It is.
Oh my god, we have succeeded wildly at this video.
Already. It's been 5 minutes.
I actually love this alleyway. I live here, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. In a box?
Yeah, I live in there. Hi girls, this is Strange coming at you live. Now you might be asking yourself, what is this? What the fuck am I looking at right now? What are you looking at right now? This is called Hipster. Recently I named it as one of the most important aesthetics of like 2010s era Tumblr. But ever since then, it has haunted me because I only scratched the surface in that video. As I mentioned in that video, hipster is a term that is extremely difficult to pin down because it feels like for a minute there, it was applied to almost anyone who seemed overly concerned with aesthetics. Whether that was a 30-year-old man who wore suspenders and had a nicely groomed beard, or a teenage girl who took pictures of Arizona iced tea cans and put like a million Instagram filters on them. What is a hipster? I have been making videos about internet aesthetics long enough to know that all of these internet aesthetics exist on an eternally overlapping Venn diagram. You can never fully separate the hipster from the 2010s Tumblr alt girl, or even the fandom nerd, or even dark academia and cottagecore more recent aesthetics like this. A lot of them tend to incorporate music elitism and wearing Doc Martens and thrift shopping. But hipster still kind of feels like the birthplace of all of these now fractured internet aesthetics, because it was around at like the beginning, like right in 2010 when social media was first becoming ubiquitous. You're all just different types of hipsters still. This is what it's about. This is the truth that lies underneath your perfectly curated dark academia outfits. So even though the term hipster can feel extremely vague, I'm going to attempt in this video to break down 2010's hipster to its bare essentials. But first, a little bit of history. Well, actually, no, before that, a message from Vessi Shoes, and then some history. Thank you so much to Vessi Shoes for sponsoring this video. Now, Vessis are not just any shoe. Nay, they're kind of the shoe that can do it all. If you are like me, live in a condo, have limited space, don't necessarily want to own a lot of things, Vessis are amazing because they serve so many different purposes. They're super comfortable for long walks, hikes, working out. They're made from Vessi's signature breathable material that helps keep your feet cool in the summer and warm in the winter. They're 100% waterproof, no more wet socks, ever. I promise you can run these things under the tap for as long as you want and no water will ever get in. Vessi wants to empower you to enjoy rainy days again without fear of ruining your shoes or getting wet. Go jump in some puddles, kids. Go on a muddy hike. Never have to worry about turning around on account of the weather. You can literally throw your Vessi shoes in the washing machine when you get home. Not only are they like the ultimate practical shoe, the designs are also super sleek and simple. They come in a variety of styles and neutral colors. Mine are, of course, black to match everything that I own. Right now you can take advantage of Vessi's Memorial Day sale and save up to 30% on various Vessi styles. You can do that over at vessi.com/strangeeons, and if you missed the Memorial Day sale, don't worry, you can still save 15% when you use code STRANGEONS at checkout. And now I return you to your regularly scheduled content. I think I have the best outfit here. Do you want to get some vegan brunch? The history of the word hipster actually goes back to the 1930s jazz scene. In 1938, a jazz musician from Harlem, New York named Cab Calloway wrote the Hipster's Dictionary, yes, with an E, where he defines common slang terms in the subculture. A hip cat is defined as a guy who knows all the answers, understands jive, and hip is defined as wise, sophisticated, anyone with boots on. Example, she's a hip chick. So these two things already kind of have adjacent meanings. They both essentially mean someone cool who knows about jazz. How hep and hip became essentially the same thing, interchangeable, is not exactly known. And then at some point, hep started to be co-opted by the fans of swing music, which was like super mainstream and not cool anymore. So hip and hipster replaced hep with a lot of jazz musicians. And like any music subculture, the 1930s, 40s hipster subculture came with fashions, slang, obviously. It was known to be more laid back and sexually liberated. People smoked weed, they were rebellious, they didn't care about conforming to mainstream social rules. Now, jazz is a music genre created by black artists. However, jazz attracted a lot of white fans as well. That was another way that the jazz subculture was very liberated for its time. It created this space where people existed together who otherwise were very segregated. So you had these white people, these white jazz fans who were participating in a historically black subculture and art form. Post-World War II, we can see that the term hipster has kind of evolved to mean any white person living an alternative lifestyle. It was no longer exactly rooted in the jazz subculture, it was kind of any person who took a step back from mainstream white American society. The work of writers such as Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg were considered to be hipster or reflect like a hipster experience at this time. In a 1957 essay, Norman Mailer defined the hipster as an American existentialist. His point in this essay was essentially that these kind of mass-scale cultural traumas, World War II, the atomic bomb, had left a lot of white Americans kind of feeling directionless, a lack of identity, emptiness, in a similar way to what had been experienced by Black Americans before them. And he was extensively criticized by a lot of Black intellectuals at the time for implying that white people could ever come close to the experience of actual genocide and systemic oppression, which, you know, seems like a valid criticism. However, regardless, I find this essay extremely interesting for its definition of the hipster as an existentialist, as someone who is not a part of a marginalized group, but who nonetheless turns to an alternative lifestyle to cope with living in a society that no longer really gives them any meaning or stability. When we fast forward to the 1990s idea of a hipster, that definition still feels extremely relevant. The 90s and into the early 2000s idea of a hipster was someone who was most likely white, middle class, educated, who rejected mainstream values, media, and fashion in favor of their own impeccable cultured taste in more obscure materials, who prided themselves in having progressive politics, who probably lived in a gentrified neighborhood of a big city. Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and New York was one of those neighborhoods that was considered to be a massive hub for hipster culture. In 2003, author Robert Lanham wrote The Hipster's Handbook. Now, this is satire. It's cringe, but I think it's on purpose. And it nonetheless sheds some light on like the most stereotypical possible image of a hipster at that point. Core elements of hipsterdom. Given their varying backgrounds and lifestyles, it is not surprising that hipsters come in many different forms. There are, however, several core elements essential to being a hipster. Hipsters are always very conscious of what they're wearing and distinguish themselves by dressing creatively. Whether they set a standard for what will be on the next cover of GQ or Vogue, sport a retro fashion look that combines kitsch with good taste, or dress casually in crunchy hippie gear, all hipsters choose a personal style for themselves that helps them stand out apart from the masses. Why so many hipsters tend to look like each other is a subject for another discussion. Hipsters possess an innate contempt for franchise, strip malls, and the corporate world in general. Their sharpest disdain, though, is reserved for the SUV, which they think is an acronym for Smog Unleashing Vehicle. Hipsters take their music collections very, very seriously. Many shape their wardrobe and often even their personalities to match the music they like. Hipsters listen solely to bands produced by independent labels and steer clear of major labels such as Island and Capitol. 11 clues you are a hipster. You graduated from a liberal arts school whose football team hasn't won a game since the Reagan administration. You frequently use the term postmodern, or its commonly used variation, pomo. Can't say that's ever exited my mouth before, no. As an adjective, noun, and verb. You carry a shoulder strap messenger bag and have at one time or another worn a pair of horn-rimmed or Buddy Holly style glasses. You have refined taste and consider yourself exceptionally cultured. You have kissed someone of the same gender and often bring this up in casual conversation. You spend much of your leisure time in bars and restaurants with monosyllabic names like Plant, Bound, and Shine. You bought your dishes and a checkered tablecloth at a thrift shop to be kitschy and often throw vegetarian dinner parties. You have one Republican friend who you always describe as being your one Republican friend. You enjoy complaining about gentrification even though you are responsible for it yourself. Your hair looks best unwashed, and you position your head on your pillow at night in a way that will really maximize your cowlicks. Core facets of the 90s hipster seem to be having a kind of quirky, unique sense of style, pairing together odd items, buying a lot of secondhand clothes, listening to music that is kind of underground or unknown or released by indie labels, having progressive beliefs, you know, maybe they're vegetarian or vegan, maybe they think the gays should have rights, being cultured TM, whether that's music, movies, fashion, food, decorating, whatever it is, hipsters pride themselves in having good taste, and they will judge you for having bad taste. They only eat fast food and watch reality TV for like the ironic kitschy vibes, you know? There is a whole section of Lanham's book that is dedicated to the UTF, the unemployed trust funder hipsters, who go to great lengths to disguise their wealth and privilege in favor of living this bohemian lifestyle. The 90s hipster very much has a reputation for appropriating these things that are associated with the working class, like wearing secondhand clothes, like having tattoos, and doing those things ironically. Appreciating dollar store dishware and kitschy souvenir salt shakers ironically, which is obviously just vapid and adds nothing to anyone's life. Just, if you like things, just like things. Unironically. It's crazy. While having progressive politics on paper is a required facet of being a hipster. They're often criticized for their only real value being coolness. It sounds like the worst of the hipsters were very much about irony and judgment and who could be the coolest by being so far removed from any genuine sentiment that they could never be criticized by their fellow hipsters. And then of course the absolute biggest joke on hipsters that everybody loves to make is that they're just as conformist as everyone else, it's just that they've invented some different standards. So they're pretentious assholes, and we hate them. But also, don't you sometimes want to stop caring about mainstream beauty standards and dress like a homeless librarian? Don't you want to buy like a really old dysfunctional phone and be like a cryptid? Don't you want to beep boop around town on a fuel-efficient Vespa? Maybe we just hate them because they're onto something. Maybe they are cool. That is the 90s hipster conundrum. So how did we get from there to the 2010s hipster? Well, let me tell you, the unthinkable happened. Hipster became a mainstream fashion trend. An article that I found detailing the rise and fall of Urban Outfitters and American apparel tells the story from the point of view of one hipster. In 2005, Daniel Bernardo, a newly minted art history graduate, decided to start his post-college life in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. He was lucky enough to find an affordable loft apartment above a skateboard shop with 4 other housemates who were all busy pursuing their dreams. One owned the shop below, 2 were artists, and the other was an aspiring fashion designer. Bernardo took a stab at starting a business selling handmade shoes. Tourists or Manhattanites who strayed into his neighborhood certainly considered the community somewhat eccentric. Bernardo, for instance, was rocking a dolly mustache. We were all heavily influenced by the ethics of the punk scene, which was about going against the norm, he recalls. I wore vintage vests, ties, and suspenders, partly because I liked them, but partly because it was what I could afford at the time. Some of my friends were into the skater look, wearing old band shirts and cut-off jeans. Others wore flannel and had beards. After moving to the neighborhood, Bernardo began to notice something odd. The offbeat outfits he and his friends were wearing started appearing on the racks of chain stores. You could pop into Urban Outfitters to buy a faded t-shirt from an obscure band, a pocket watch, and Victorian pinstripe trousers. You could walk out of American Apparel with a leotard and 80s spandex shorts. And suddenly, hipster no longer described just certain social groups from certain neighborhoods of New York. Anyone, anywhere, could be a hipster. So now that your brain is a little more muscular, got all that knowledge in it, I'm gonna try and break down the essentials of that 2010s hipster that we all remember so fondly. Oh, Bird. Do you know why is the hipster? So in the 90s and early 2000s, hipster fashion kind of referred to outfits that were a little bit odd, quirky, hodgepodge, put together from old, out-of-style elements. In the 2010s, I would say it was more defined. Certain elements were, by definition, hipster, due to the fact that these things were now being mass-marketed. The most recognizable element of hipster fashion, obviously, was the hipster glasses. However, I'd say any large glasses, round glasses, could kind of be considered hipster as well. Looking nerdy was definitely very in with the hipsters. For men, beards and handlebar mustaches, traditional tattoos, a lot of vintage-inspired fashion, like vintage dresses, shirts layered with sweaters, flowy skirts, a lot of things with patterns, anything that was kind of plaid or floral. I think you could get away with mixing patterns pretty easily as well. Docs and Converse were definitely acceptable footwear. Maybe Vans. Those 3 shoes tend to be the uniform of like every subculture ever invented, but hipsters also really enjoyed their leather shoes, leather boots, Oxfords. There was a lot of layering. You have to wear like a button-up shirt with a sweater on top, and then another jacket on top of that, and then shorts, and then tights, and then leg warmers, and then shoes, and then like a beanie. That's your outfit. Oh, a scarf. You're gonna need a scarf. I think wearing flannel shirts and layering were pretty much the entire essence of like the lumberjack subset of hipsters, and this style was not like contained to just straight men. Like, do you remember when we used to say lumberjack lesbian?
Yeah.
I'm asking you specifically. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm starting to think that was the bad time. The absolute most watered down version of hipster was just like flannel and denim and scarves and wide brim hats and like just things that were in fashion in the 2010s. They were calling everything hipster, I'm telling ya. You can have like a 20-something man who dresses like he's 80 and has a handlebar mustache and traditional tattoos, and he's a hipster. You can have a woman who has a lot of stereotypically nerdy interests, wears a lot of vintage dresses, maybe goes for a little bit of a librarian vibe. She's a hipster. Teenage girl who wears wide brim hats and denim shorts with tights, hipster. Starbucks Frappuccino core. The question is, but why? Clearly, we must go deeper. Do you want to come over and listen to Neutral Milk Hotel later? I bet you've never even heard of Neutral Milk Hotel.
I honestly don't know what you're talking about. So
You don't? You haven't heard of Neutral Milk Hotel? Neutral Milk Hotel. Aeroplane Over the Sea? Supposed good taste has always remained key to being a hipster, whether that's in music, film, literature, arts, photography, fashion. An art student in any of these realms is an ideal hipster. The great thing about being a hipster, specifically in the 2010s, was that you didn't need the education, the formal education, or the IRL friends to discuss these things with. All of it was accessible to you via the internet. You could post your poetry on Tumblr, you could take photos on your iPhone and put filters on them to make them look like they were taken on film. You could access whatever music you wanted for free, leave YouTube comments on Nirvana lyric videos like, I'm 16, but I was born in the wrong era. The hipster must reject mainstream media in favor of true art. Hey girl. Do you want to come over and listen to Neutral Milk Hotel? All of this good taste going around was eventually going to lead to a lot of elitism and division among hipsters. Hipsters are not united by any cohesive music taste or any taste really. Their tastes are all over the place. What unites them is the hipster attitude. Some of them loved 2010s indie music, some of them loved classic rock, some of them only listened to experimental Icelandic techno, some of them, they only listened to goat ASMR set to ambient radio static. Their taste is not only unique, but it is good. And if anything they like becomes mainstream popular, they liked it before it was cool. The most soulless mass-marketed variety of like the Urban Outfitters variety of hipster, very much relied on the idea that older things are better. T-shirts of old iconic bands like Nirvana and Pink Floyd, cult classic films. It's very easy to take old things that were extremely popular back in the day because they were good, and then resell them back to young people as high culture. The teen hipster that shopped at like Urban Outfitters, American Apparel, those kinds of stores, tended to love old films, old music, tended to be into records and CDs and instant cameras and film cameras. And I think one of the reasons the 2010s hipster is still quite interesting to me is because it was the beginning of that like commodified nostalgia boom that is still going to this day. That being said, hipster in the 2010s was not all about just liking old things that were easy to mass market. There were lots of hipsters that were still into like cool local bands in their city, experimental goat ASMR, etc. Blow her a kiss. Are you violently attracted to me right now?
Oh yeah.
I have not had one of these since I was like a child teenager. These things are fucking moist. The urban space is the natural environment of the humble hipster. I'm Steve Irwin. The bicycle is a huge symbol of the hipster for that reason. They tend to live in cities, get around bicycles or walking. They forsake the suburban way of driving their smog-unleashing vehicles to the Costco to buy hot dogs in bulk.
Hey.
Oh, this thing is fucking heavy. The urban space is the natural environment of the hipster. It's also a lot easier to dress like a weirdo in the city. No one cares. I'm dressed like a complete psychopath today and I've only gotten a few stares. It's easier to find music and art shows, independent film festivals, all of the things that a hipster needs to thrive in the city. I think we might genuinely be hipsters.
Really?
A little bit. I think every young person who lives in a city is on some level a little bit of a hipster, I think.
We don't drink frappuccinos though.
That's true, we don't drink frappuccinos, but that's a unique kind of hipster.
There you go.
One specific urban space that is just so heavily associated with hipsters is the coffee shop. What is it about coffee shops? Do tell me.
Attract the hipsters.
Yeah, what do you think it is?
I think it's because coffee, you could be so nerdy about coffee.
Yeah, that's literally what I have written down.
Okay, cool.
Coffee is something you can be a snob about. Making a good cup of coffee is a very precise art. Hipsters love all that shit. The ultimate hipster is a barista. The most watered down version of like the hipster coffee shop aesthetic obviously is Starbucks. I don't know if there was feels like there was a huge Starbucks craze, Frappuccino craze amongst like teen girls who were consuming the hipster content.
I think the trend hasn't died.
Yeah. That's fair. Starbucks are still very busy every time I go into one.
Willing to spend like $7 on a coffee.
Yeah, that's weird. You guys are weird. So where else, besides the coffee shop, do you tend to find the hipster spending their time? Well, there's bookstores, record stores, thrift shops, libraries, art galleries, museums. The hypothetical platonic ideal of a hipster coffee shop, I guess. Libraries, art galleries, all of these places kind of stand out to me as you know, places where you might take a step back from technology, hang out with your friends, have some real experiences, connect with people. I think it probably isn't a coincidence that hipster started to really appeal to people around the same time we started spending a lot more time online. The hipster expresses a desire for high quality things, which are now often a relic of the past, for IRL connection, which is becoming harder and harder to find. Hi, Pigeon!
Hello.
Are you a hipster?
Yes.
I think that's a hipster right there.
That Bob?
That fucking guy, yeah.
Yeah.
He's quirky. Hipster. What do you have to say? Sir, do you listen to Neutral Milk Hotel? He didn't want to be interviewed at this time. Neutral Milk Hotel? Aeroplane over the sea? I can tell you about Neutral Milk Hotel. No, it's copyrighted. A core facet of the hipster is definitely having progressive politics, feminism, environmental consciousness, the general idea of equality, gay rights. And you know, those things are not bad. I like having gay rights. The contradiction inherent in the hipster, which is something that goes all the way back to the 90s, is that despite standing for social progress, they tend to be harbingers of gentrification. Hipsters want the art and the underground music scene and all of that good stuff. But when the shops start moving into town selling $25 vegan sushi to cater to them, the rents start going up, and it starts becoming harder for artists and for independent shops to survive. Neighborhoods such as this one, Queen West in Toronto, used to be a hub for artists and bohemians, but unfortunately it was infected with their coolness. It became desirable. The affluent hipster types moved in, and 30 years later it is an absolute hellscape of fast fashion with a Starbucks every 3 blocks. There it is. The evil. See, now you don't have to thrift shop with all the gross poor people to get cool hipster fashion. The commodification of counterculture and gentrification are best friends. They are kissing on the mouth. So let's relax with a nice Americano. What have we learned, kids? The hipster fashion that was everywhere when I was growing up, those stupid mustaches on everything, was a commercialized regurgitation of the vintage clothes, endearing kitschiness, old technology, appreciation of good art and nostalgia championed by the 90s hipsters. They mass-marketed the counterculture by honoring art, music, and fashion of the past, rejecting traditional lifestyles and careers, and appreciating irony. You would flip through one of their lookbooks, walk into their stores, and think, I am in this world. They made a hard-to-define bohemian lifestyle accessible to an entire generation of young people growing up in the cookie-cutter suburbs. And, like, reading that on my screen, like, that is creepy. That is so slimy evil genius, to take this counterculture that is compelling to people, take all of the real rebelliousness out of it, and like sell this shiny version back to people instead. We feel existential, we want to be hipsters because we live in a society, and then that society just starts selling those things to us. Insane! You ever think about how we live in a society? But when coming to conclusions about 2010's hipster, I have to draw from my own lived experience as well. Because I was that kid growing up in the cookie-cutter suburbs, learning what Pink Floyd and Nirvana were for the first times because I saw them on Urban Outfitters t-shirts. This trend did introduce a lot of us to fashion for the first time, to music and movies that we genuinely loved, to trying out photography for the first time, even if it was on a mint green instant camera. I knew many girls growing up who found genuine joy in, and it still to this day have been shaped by hipster trends. And I think it is beautiful and human that, against all odds, we are able to give meaning to these things that are soulless and mass-marketed. And I don't want to minimize that it actually was a positive influence in some ways on a lot of people growing up, including myself. The conclusion of this video is not hipster bad, hipster cringe. Trends are all inherently meaningless and stupid, and you don't need to follow them, but if they bring you joy, then do it. That's all I gotta say. Strange out. See you in another video very soon.